Do. Hello, hello, hello. Anybody there? Oh, hey, look at that. People are there. Hello. Now,
I'm here.
We're here.
We've all been here, Phil. The question is, where were you?
No,
I'm here.
I was late.
We've all been here, Phil. The question is, where were you?
No,
I'm here.
I was late.
We've all been here, Phil. The question is, where were you?
Christian, why is it?
I'm here.
Why is it going round and round?
We've all been here, Phil. The question is, where were you?
Christian, why is it?
I'm here.
Why is it going round and round?
We've all been here, Phil. The question is, where
Hang on. I am all messed up. Hang on. Oh, there's the problem. I need to mute that. It just went away. Okay. What's going on? I need to mute that. It just went away. Okay. It's not working. Nothing's working. Nothing is working. It's not working. Nothing's working. Nothing is working. It's not working. You guys can talk, right?
We're hearing everything through you, and it sounds horrible.
Oh, you guys can talk, right? Okay, I'll just kill everything. You guys can talk, right? Okay.
we do miss Jason.
I'll just kill everything. Yeah, where's Jason?
He's having a rough night because he's got lots of extra work that he's trying to manage.
Oh.
He's having a rough night because he's got lots of extra work that he's trying to manage.
Oh. All right, I gotta kill.
Rough night because he's got lots of extra work that he's trying to manage.
Oh. All right, I gotta kill.
Rough night because he's got lots of extra work that he's trying to manage.
Okay.
Is that it? Is the problem over?
I don't know. Are we streaming?
Yes, we're streaming still.
I just had to kill Slack and my browsers, just kill them all. So
they're all dead.
Yeah.
Everything is dead.
I've got nothing but Zoom up now. Everything else is dead. I had to turn.
Well, why don't you welcome everybody now that you're not echoing in everybody's head?
I still have a massive echo. Is it my problem?
Yeah,
why
now
don't
it must
you
be your
welcome
problem.
everybody now that you're not echoing in everybody's head?
I still have a massive echo. Is it my problem?
Yeah,
why
now it
don't
must
you
be your
welcome
problem.
everybody now that you're not echoing in everybody's head?
Terrible. Quit your browser and quit Slack. Yeah, are you okay now?
No.
You're not okay?
Okay.
Are you not? Are we not entertained?
I quit Slack and I quit the browser.
Yeah, so no echo?
No echo.
Okay.
All right, let me see if I can turn this off again.
Turn what off again?
My headphones. I don't want to use these headphones.
Oh.
All right. Are we good now?
Maybe.
I think so. Are we good?
Maybe.
What a nightmare.
Okay, great. So we're all set. We're ready to go. Phil, take it away.
What? Go where? I got nowhere to go.
You gotta welcome people. You gotta entertain them. You gotta play Pinky Pete. I guess he's dead. What are we calling the other guy?
Dead. Plinky Pedro, I think was.
Plinky Pedro.
His last name, but he's on the wall behind me because my grandkids ended up being over and we were taking care of them unexpectedly, and I forgot all about the live stream.
It happens. Kids can suck you in.
And they walked out of the room about 5 minutes ago, or walked out of the house about 5 minutes ago. And I finally sat down on the couch, and then Julie texted me and said, "Where the heck are you?" You
Well, now you're
loser.
here. And we've had a lot of time getting to know each other in the chat. We've got 82 people watching now, and they have endured all of our technical difficulties so far. So that's exciting. They're getting to know each other, which is really fun. And we even have a question already. This question is from Lori Wiley on Patreon. And Sky, I'm going to start with you because
She had a whole bunch of questions. I
she
saw
did.
her questions come in.
She has 3. We're going to start with the easy one. How would you answer someone if they asked you how one becomes a Christian, or how to be saved, as the Philippian jailer asked Paul?
Well, back up and give the context for that question, because it had very specific context.
Okay, well, the very first one was, can you expound on something that you discussed last month?
Yes.
Sky mentioned that in Acts, everyone in the household of Cornelius became Christians because Cornelius did. Isn't that a bit, just a little bit, like saying everyone in the Roman Empire became Christians when Constantinople did? How would you answer someone if they asked you how one becomes a Christian? So really, that is 2 questions.
It's one question.
Yeah, I think that
Kind of.
conversation was in the context of individualism versus corporate identity. And our culture, Western culture, is highly individualistic. So we tend to view issues of faith and trust and identity as individual choice. Whereas there are other cultures, including ancient cultures, that were much more communal, where your identity and your religious affiliation was linked to the group that you belong to. So in a household structure, whatever the patriarch of the household, whatever their identity was, became your identity. So when Cornelius decided to put his trust in Christ, then it was understood everyone under Cornelius's authority in his household would do the same, whether they wanted to or not. It's a subsuming kind of idea of identity, and that is totally foreign to modern Western people. We just don't get it, but it's kind of just accepted in the New Testament that that's how the world operates, and no one really thought twice about it. So on the flip side, there are plenty of other passages in the New Testament which do speak about individual volition and choice. So both are kind of represented there. If someone were to ask me, how do you become a Christian? Well, it's the same way Cornelius did, which is by putting your trust in Christ. And that trust is not just an assent to theological beliefs or doctrines, but an active trust and obedience, and actually believing what Jesus said and seeking to follow what he taught. Right now in the devotional with God Daily, I've been writing some stuff about why does Jesus promise the Holy Spirit would come and dwell within those who love him and obey his commandments. And those things always go together in John's gospel. To love Jesus is to obey his commandments. To trust Jesus means you obey his commandments. So there's no separation between trust, love, and obedience. They all kind of go together. That's how you become a Christian.
Well, but is there a difference between just saying, I believe in God and that Jesus Christ is his son, and developing a relationship with Christ and maturing as a Christian? I mean, is it I just have to believe in God, the once saved, always saved thing? Or is there more to our salvation as Christians?
Well, let me back up a second. Especially with the Cornelius story or others like that in the book of Acts, it's a little bit like, we do this all the time in our own household. A 5-year-old child doesn't have the cognitive ability or the information or even the developmental capacity to make a personal decision to follow Jesus Christ. He or she just doesn't fully grasp what that means. And so there's always been a tradition in the church where a child's faith was understood to be imparted from their household or from their parent. Right? This is why some traditions have infant baptisms. It's why we do child dedications in other churches. It's assumed that the community this child belongs to, particularly the community of their mother and father and family, imparts the faith to them. They're kind of covered by the faith of the corporate body to which they belong until they are old enough to accept or reject that on their own. That's a little bit what you see going on in corporate identity cultures like the ancient world in Cornelius's household, where an individual within that system may not have the education, capacity, training, whatever, to fully understand who Jesus is and make their own consent to follow him, but it's understood that I completely trust the head of my household. And if my head of household completely trusts this Jesus, then vicariously through that person, I completely trust Jesus. That's kind of what's going on in the ancient world. And I think that's legitimate. I know it sounds really bizarre, but I think it's legitimate. However, when you do have that capacity to make the decision yourself, and you do have the information to make the decision yourself, now you are on the hook, sort of sense, or responsible for whether or not you will choose to follow this Christ. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So
That makes sense.
it's a little both and.
Okay. So she's got one more question, and then I'm going to jump to Ryan Lake's question. She said, can you discuss what it looks like to decolonize a library?
But read the rest, because she went in deeper than that.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't have the rest of it. She had originally written them somewhere, and Julie just pasted these from Patreon, which I can't see. So do you remember the essence of the rest of her question?
Yeah. Is it a matter of, what does it mean to decolonize a library? Does it mean you have to get rid of all the authors who owned slaves or did bad things? It's like, do you have to throw out Jonathan Edwards? And yeah, that was the question. What do we mean when we say that? And does it mean, do you have to throw out everyone who's white, for example, and read no white authors?
So it's like cancel culture of your bookshelf.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think you have to do that, but I think what you ought to do is strive to read more broadly and expand your library to include non-European voices, non-Anglo voices, non-male voices, and voices from outside your particular stream of the church. So if you're an evangelical white North American Protestant, read more Roman Catholics, read more Anglicans, read more Africans, read more Asians, read more women or men, whatever you need more of in your library. But I don't think it means in and of itself you just throw out every white man who wrote before 1860. It's kind of counterproductive.
My comment would be, it's not about subtracting, it's about adding.
Right.
It doesn't mean you don't read Augustine. It means doesn't mean you don't read Willard. It means you also add Esau Macaulay, and you just look at other perspectives, and don't assume that, to put it one way, the white way is the right way. In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't, but it's best to just read broadly.
Well, and keep in mind, this is not going to go over well with some people, but there's not a book in the New Testament that was written by a woman. Does that mean we need to eliminate the New Testament? Of course not. It was a product of its time when most women were not educated or literate. Women's perspectives are certainly incorporated into the New Testament, most strikingly with the resurrection stories of Jesus. But it's a product of its time, just as any of the other books on our shelves are a product of their time, and they need to be understood and read as such. But we need to expand our libraries for sure.
Okay. I'm going to move on to Ryan Lake's question. He's got a big one here. Do you think that there is a relationship between Christian nationalism, fundamentalism, and an evangelical reading of the Constitution? Have evangelicals come to view the Constitution as scripture? Now, we've talked about that, before. Maybe you could sum up pretty quickly.
Bill, you had a conversation with David French kind of about this, didn't you? At one point,
we talked about constitutional originalism. It wasn't as much about how evangelicals read the Constitution. So not really, no. I mean, in my mind, there are lots of different streams of evangelicalism, and some have more nationalistic and Christian nationalistic tendencies, and some don't. So there's nothing, I don't think there's inherent, I don't know if you disagree, Scott, I don't think there's anything inherently Christian nationalist about general evangelical thought.
No, but it does seem that American evangelicals are particularly susceptible to Christian nationalism, but evangelicalism technically is a global phenomenon. It's not just an American thing. And when you get outside the American context, it does tend to look very different.
Right. Well, yeah. And Christian nationalism isn't just an American phenomenon either. There was a whole lot of Christian nationalism in Great Britain up until about 100 years ago, and in the Roman Empire 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. So there's nationalism mixed with, that it's Christendom. It's God has put this nationalistic entity in this place, in this time, to rule the earth for his purposes. And that was actually true of Israel. It hasn't been true of any nation state since.
What do you make of the part of the question in how Christian nationalists / fundamentalists read the Constitution as an inspired document, basically?
I'm not sure where that came from. We need John Fia. Can you get John Fia on the horn to tell us when we started it? Well, you can go back all the way to the City on the Hill guy. What was his name?
John Winthrop.
Yeah, but that was pre the Constitution. He never lived to see the Constitution.
When the Constitution was first written and being debated by the states whether it should be ratified, conservative Christians were very much against it. And their single biggest objection to the document was that it's a completely secular document. It makes no mention of God whatsoever.
I remember that.
Yeah, so it was not heralded as some divinely inspired document. It was seen as inherently flawed and godless. So it's funny how that's turned 180, and now it's fundamentalist Christians who are often eager to defend that document as inspired by God.
Let me posit this to you. It seems like the more individualistic we became as a culture, the more we latched on to the individual rights are my God-given rights. And so, and that whole, idea of the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the right to own a gun, all that's the individual stuff that they feel or we feel we're given by God. And so I think maybe that's where they get co-opted.
Yeah, I think that's true. My speculation, John Fia would be a much better person on this. My speculation is some of the divine inspiration for the Constitution probably originated in the mid 1800s when abolitionists were seeking to end slavery, and Christians in the South were arguing that slavery was instilled in the Constitution, right? The 3/5 clause and other things. And amending that or changing that would somehow violate God's divine will for our country, given that it's in the Constitution. And then it probably got another boost during the Cold War, like so many other things that were American, as a way of contrasting the American system with communism and atheism. So all things American got wrapped in the flag, or all things Christian got wrapped in the flag, and the Constitution probably got caught up in that. So whenever a segment of America felt threatened, they try to bring God in as their support. So support the Constitution because it supports slavery, support America because we're Christian, not atheists, and all those things just bolster this illusion that the Constitution is divinely inspired.
All right, I'm going to move us on. We got a lot more questions here. All right, Rob Mishler says, I'm convinced Jesus was serious. 2 years ago, you had a 20-tweet thread on pacifism that amounts to, given the direction of evangelicalism, my question is, are you an Anabaptist yet?
This is to me.
Yeah.
I don't remember the 20-tweet thread on pacifism. No, I'm not an Anabaptist yet. But there's a lot about the Anabaptist tradition that I deeply admire. Like I said, read broadly and fill your shelf with people who aren't in your tradition. Yeah. Anabaptism is one of those, and it's got a lot to offer us today.
Rob says, the Holy Post has led me to a number of neo-Anabaptists, and they kind of resonate with me. With God Daily only seems to amplify this. What are the radical reformers closer to the heart of the gospel?
What was the last part? What are the radical reformers?
Yeah. Where? With God Daily only seems to amplify this, where the radical reformers closer to the heart of the gospel.
In some ways, yeah, I think they were. And probably the part that you're likely resonating with is, unlike other Reformed traditions in Northern Europe, the Anabaptists didn't align themselves with civil government. So Lutherans aligned themselves with government, Anglicans aligned themselves with government, the Anabaptists didn't. And so right now, when we see so many Christians aligning themselves politically with one side or another, the Anabaptist tradition looks really appealing. because they didn't do that. And I think there is something healthy and very New Testament about that. And that's why they stand out right now.
That came up in the conversation with Dave Fitch a few months ago, who is a neo-Anabaptist, and it was the episode about critical race theory, but he mentioned his Anabaptist leanings numerous times in that conversation.
All right, Sky, another question for you. Do you, Diane Newcomer and her family, they like biographies, and they're wondering if you have one to recommend on MLK.
I do. In fact, someone else emailed me about this. There's one right here. There's this one, King, Pilgrimage to the Mountaintop, Howard Sitkoff. That's probably, I'm sure there's a bazillion biographies on King, but this is one I read some years ago that I thought was really good because it didn't just focus on him as a civil rights leader, but talked about his formation as a pastor during the years before he was super public. So that's one I'd recommend. But beyond that, this is a really good little book. Let's call it A Knock at Midnight, which is just a collection of famous sermons that he preached. I drew a lot from this during the series we did in With God Daily. And to be clear, like a lot of evangelicals are going to find King's theology at places very troubling because he was by no means a conservative evangelical in his theology. But I do think he has a lot to say to us still today, and he's worth reading.
Okay. So here's another question from Wayne Stam over on Patreon. He and his wife are ending their jobs at a Christian institution after 18 years because of issues of racism, sexism, LGBTQ+, etc. How do we know where we should look for jobs in the Christian community that will be open to an authentic understanding of Jesus' words and actions? Or is it wiser to be an example in a secular workplace and show others that Christians can be thoughtful? We've always been in ministry, and it feels weird not to know where to go. Welcome to the family.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
How do you know where to go? Well, you can get a pretty good feel of churches and ministries just by looking at their content, looking at the stuff they're putting out. So that helps. And then if you ever do an interview for a job, you can ask lots of pointed questions, or you can just really make your point of view clear on social media, and you won't get that job interview for the place where you wouldn't be a good fit. So
good point there, Phil. Leading the way, I might add.
Yeah, thank you. Sky, what do you think about the comment? Is it better to just try to be an example in a secular workplace?
That's tough. I can't answer that because it depends. We're all called to different settings and environments, and I don't think one is better than the other. I think it comes down to wherever you're called to be, that's what you do, and you do it faithfully. And they each carry their own challenges and comforts, for sure. I think personally, I would argue, though, if you've only ever spent your time in Christian ministry environments, even if it's just for a brief season, I think it would probably ultimately benefit you to have some experience outside of that in a non-Christian environment, even if ultimately you end up back in a ministry setting. I just think you will gain a world of perspective on how those outside the bubble really operate. I recommend this to pastors, other than just the sabbatical, of actually having a season when you're not in the pulpit and you're not called pastor and you have some other identity, will enrich your ability to shepherd other people. Because when all you know is the pastoral role, I think it can kind of warp our perceptions a little bit.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that a little bit by saying that most of my quote unquote ministry is in the secular world. But what I found such incredible joy by being around a ton of people that are not Christians. In France, nobody really has any faith. And yet them watching my journey, walking with God with this project, that they have just been blown away, and they ask more questions. I've been able to share what I'm thinking, believing, and praying, and it's been super rewarding. So there's a time and a place, I think, for everything. And the most important thing, Sky, that you said, I think, was that we really need to be connected to Christ and seeking him for him to direct us where he's leading us. And I think as we're in that conversation with him, he will make that path clear to us. I think it's, there's probably some trauma after breaking a church after 18 years and walking away. And so really the Lord's the only one I think that can, show us where to go after that. All right, next question. Jack Brown wants to know, why do so many American Christians often worship the Second Amendment more fervently than God?
Bill?
Well, that's a good question, John.
That was
Guy?
actually Jack. I don't know if he goes by
Jack.
John, but
Was it Jack? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jack. I was thinking about guns. Because our political cultural identity is often our primary identity, and the Second Amendment has become a huge part of culture. So, it would be interesting to try to figure out what would be an equivalent on the more progressive or liberal side. What are the things that progressive and liberal Christians actually elevate to a higher position than their spiritual identity. I'm not sure, but guns is definitely a big one on the conservative side, and in big parts of America. It's not even among conservative Christians in Illinois, guns are not a huge thing. So it's somewhat regional and quite politically aligned.
Okay, so I have a next question for you. This is Andrew following up on Sky's Cornelius answer. Does that mean that there will be Christians who live forever with God but didn't actually believe in him personally?
The short answer is yes. In that, not to get morbid, but I think there were probably quite a few children who didn't have a cognitive knowledge of God the way we might want a Christian to have, who nonetheless died before they could reach such an age, who will be with God. So yeah, there are. And we talked, I think, in our last live stream about mentally handicapped adults who may not have the cognitive capacity to understand all these things. So I certainly hope so. Otherwise, if you have to have a certain level of intellect and education in order to be a Christian, then that good news is very limited given the course of history. And so, yeah, I think the short answer is yes.
Okay, Steve and Susan Schmidt say, you've always mentioned the sermon-centric Sunday, but what do you recommend instead?
Football centric.
Right. Second Amendment centric.
I think that you've meant communion centric, or more of a liturgical.
Yeah, I don't think there's
focus.
one alternative. And I wrote an article about this. You could probably Google it, for Christianity Magazine in the UK. The argument was not that there's one better alternative from a sermon-centric model, but that with technology, the sermon doesn't have to be central anymore because we have more effective and efficient ways of disseminating biblical content to people all week long. So when we do physically gather together as a church, why don't we use that gathering for a time for something that can only be done when we're physically gathered together? Because teaching can be done when we're not physically gathered together. So let's use that time for communion. Let's use it for fellowship. Let's use it for other things that require us to be physically present. And I think there's a variety of options there, but we won't ever do that if we have it locked in our heads that when we gather, it has to be primarily to listen to a sermon.
Excellent answer. And by the way, Lori Wiley says, thanks for your explanation about Cornelius. That was helpful. All right. So Maria has 4 young children listening to the podcast. And that has been one of the highlights for each week for the past 3 years. So thank you. They just ordered your Laugh and Learn Bible, Phil, and are loving it. Awesome. Gage wants to know, Sky, if you have an update on the big snow pile you said would last till the summer.
Yes, it's finally gone. I think, honestly, in the last just couple days is when it disappeared.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
How many missing children were discovered as it melted away?
Yeah, really. There was a lot of garbage in that snow. It was pretty filthy.
All right. So Naomi has a question from Patreon. Can you help me understand shame-based cultures better? Oh, I certainly can, because I came from one. I think I get that honoring family clan is important, but doesn't that philosophy protect abusers? As a former fundamentalist who is now very attentive to issues of spiritual and emotional abuse in the church, how am I to respect shame-based cultures?
Bill, you want that one?
No, no, I don't.
Um,
Remind us what the alternative is. What's the Western is? We got shame and honor. Is it shame and honor?
yeah.
So
Well,
Western.
no, shame and honor is the same thing.
Oh, okay. So what's the other one?
The other is usually merit-based or
Guilt.
achievement-based, and individualism, where
Okay.
it's or status-based. But here's the thing, like, she's absolutely right. Like, a shame-based, honor-based culture can protect abusers when they're in a position of power where you don't question authority and they can get away with stuff. So there is a shortcoming there. But on the flip side, the alternative can also be abusive, because when you have a culture like what is dominant in America today, where there is no honor of authority or structure, it can also protect abusers, because one of the things that deters people from abuse is the threat that they will be shamed and ostracized from the community if they misbehave. When you no longer have that in the culture, people do all kinds of terrible things without consequence. I mean, to be, an example of something that we probably have all experienced, somebody in a church does something that is horrifically sinful and or abusive, and their particular congregation tries to bring discipline to that person. And what do? They just move along to the next church down the road and do it all over again, because there's no shame. There's no sense of I can keep doing it because there's no accountability. So yes, there are abuses in shame-based cultures, but there are also abuses in non-shame-based cultures. It's just the nature of the abuse changes. There's no silver bullet to solve the problem of unregenerate, ungodly abusers. They exist in every culture, and every
Right.
culture has different ways of protecting or exposing them. And you just have to figure out the contours of your own context and how to do what's godly and right in that. So,
And I don't think we've ever said, one or the other is the right
right.
culture. It's just they both have blind spots, and if you're unaware of your own cultural blind spots, you're just bumping into them all the time. So it's helpful to know, even in the difference between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, and the different thought traditions. Learning about the other exposes your own cultural blind spots, which is helpful when reading the Bible.
Yeah, another framework for discussing this is what's called high distance and low distance cultures. So a high distance culture is where there is a very strong sense of hierarchy, and a low distance culture is where people more or less see one another as equal. So for example, in some churches, it's totally acceptable to refer to the pastor by their first name, right? It's just John or Debbie or who, whatever first name, they're the pastor. But in a high distance culture, you would never in a million years refer to the pastor by their first name. They are simply, Pastor Jones or that's the distance culture. And in a distance culture, yeah, you're right. It's easier for abusers to hide in positions of power. But ironically, in a low distance culture where there's this acceptability and this pureness, abusers thrive there too, because the closeness allows for abusive behaviors to engage, to happen as well. So there's no silver bullet. They all have their own issues.
All right,
And
next.
also, in a low distance culture, the authority figure has very little authority because he's just a peer. So when there is a pastor who sees wrongdoing, quite often people say, "Hey, if you point that out, I'm just leaving the church."
Right.
Stan, because I don't recognize that you have any authority over me.
Right.
Whereas in an Eastern, more of an Eastern culture, that would be huge. The shaming of the pastor having to call you out on your behavior would be devastating. And for us, it's like, I didn't like him anyway.
Right.
All right. So Carol Lemeroux, lovely French name there, says that we frequently refer to conservative Christians. Could you explain specifically what you mean by that? Is that theologically conservative, politically conservative, or a combination of the two?
Look at those eyebrows go.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's both, and hopefully when we say that, we're providing some context as to what, I mean, in general, when I say conservative Christians, I'm talking about Christians from the fundamentalist side of the modernist fundamentalist split. So fundamentalists and evangelicals are conservative Christians that have a high view of Scripture. Typically, high Scripture, low church is conservative, and a lower view of Scripture and a higher view of church or high church is more liberal. So if we're talking politics, we usually call that out politically conservative Christians, which is different than a theologically conservative Christian. But a lot of what we're trying to do is separate the complete blur between those two distinctions. That theological conservatism does not necessarily lead to political conservatism, and vice versa. So we're talking about both, and hopefully we make that clear when we're talking, but maybe sometimes we don't.
All right. Well, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. Thanks to Alyssa Barella. Have you guys heard about the Instagram preacher and sneakers man who posts about pastors wearing 5,000 shoes and other expensive clothes?
Yeah. We covered it when it first happened 3 or 4 years ago, maybe more than that. Whenever it first came out, we talked about it on the show.
I think Sarah Pulliam just did an article for the Washington Post. She's my former colleague from CT, and it's gotten a ton of buzz.
Mm-hmm.
It was on the Drudge Report even. So a lot of people are talking about it.
It's back in the news.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Abraham said that he loved the Lecrae interview and wants to know if you've considered interviewing KB and Amin Hudson from the Southside Rabbi podcast. KB has referenced Phil on his podcast in a good way.
Well, thanks, KB. I don't know who that is. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Well, you better check out Southside Rabbi podcast. Okay. Alyssa Varela says Tim Gombas would be also awesome to have on the Holy Post. Didn't we have him on?
I just interviewed him this week, actually.
Oh, okay.
So he'll be in a future episode.
We've talked about him numerous times.
Yeah. Lauren Mulford said that she loves the Southside Rabbi. So there's 2 votes for that. And Barb seconds Tim Gombas. So she doesn't agree with everything he has to say, but he does make her think.
Either do we.
Yeah. Noah agrees with Alyssa. And so let's see. Is there a list of guests and works they talk about on the podcast? I know that I love purchasing works, and it would help me to have them in a list.
You want a full list of like the 400 people we've had on the show?
We haven't had 400.
We should though have a list.
And I have a list. We are talking about the next generation of the website and what we should make it easier to do, in exploring the back catalog. And if there should be a reading list, kind of a universal reading list for the Holy Post, which is all the books that we're looking at or talking about in one place. See, we've started putting them in the show notes. So if we're talking about a book, it should be showing up in the show notes nowadays, but that doesn't go back very far because Julie started it, and she's been here, I guess, about a year. So it should go back, I don't know, 6 months, 8, 9 months. But a universal reading list is one of our wish list items for the Holy Post website version 2.
And as our Patreon grows, that will make things a lot easier. So we really appreciate you Patreon supporters for sure. And challenge your friends, to join our little Patreon family, and they can come and join us. Okay, so DB has a lighter question. Your podcast is something I enjoy and gives me hope. What is something like that for each of you? So I'm going to go to Phil first. He hasn't talked enough this podcast.
I know.
You're still catching up and getting your mind here.
Yeah, I'm like, what? There's a live stream? Oh, crap. What gives me hope? I'll tell you what doesn't give me hope.
But that wasn't the question.
I'm doing process of elimination. So I'll get to the thing. What doesn't give me hope is social media.
Especially Facebook.
What doesn't give me hope is Facebook comment threads. What does give me hope is some of the really good thinking that's being done, by some of the authors and thinkers that we interview, but then also some other podcasts. We've had Mike Erie on the show a bunch, and I love the stuff he's doing on his podcast. We've had John Mark Comer on the show. I love the stuff that he does, with Sayer. What's Sayer?
Mark Sayers.
Yeah, Mark Sayers, what they're doing together, what Justin Brierley is doing in the UK. There's all sorts of stuff in the UK that there's evangelicalism that just doesn't have the baggage of, the kind of the fundamentalists flirtation with racism and all this just other baggage that crept into conservative Christianity because of the cultural heritage of America. So when you sit down with, N.T. Wright or you listen to John Lennox or Alistair McGrath or these great thinkers that are kind of following in the tradition of, C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton in the UK, it's just really refreshing that you don't have to, quite often in America, you have to choose between historic theological orthodoxy or cultural relevance. And when you start listening to the British evangelical thinkers, you almost never bump into that issue. It just isn't an issue. So I find more hope, outside the US, but there's really good thinking, coming from more of the fringes, John Tyson in New York and John Mark Comer and in Portland. And, there's good stuff happening. We just need to gather together a little more critical mass of it so that it is louder. We need to make the good stuff louder because the bad stuff is really loud.
So true. What about you, Sky?
Well,
what is something that gives you hope and that's light?
I agree with everything Phil just said. The one thing that comes to my mind is I get emails regularly from listeners of the podcast or subscribers to my devotional. And some of them are heartbreaking, but a lot of them, even the heartbreaking ones, I find some hope in, because it's usually people who are wrestling with the faith they grew up with or the community they're a part of, and their eyes have been opened to a deeper communion with Christ and a more loving posture towards the community around them and the people who are different than them. And they're struggling to figure out what to do with that and how to reconcile those things and where do I go with this. And the fact that people are struggling with that, even though it's painful at the moment, I find really hopeful, because it means there's growth, it means there's change, it means that there's renewal coming and happening. And as I hear those stories, it just makes me realize that Christ has not given up on his church in America.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, I feel exactly the same way, in that it can look very bleak and bad that we are this divided country and things are so terrible if we focus on that. But I feel a lot of hope in that brokenness, because I look at what I grew up with, because everything that was said in whispers back then behind other people's backs is now being said out loud. But what I see in that is a wonderful, freeing thing, which is now we know what people think and where they stand. And we can actually say, do I believe those things? Do I think those things? Is this the direction I want to go in? What do I really believe? Who is God? What does the Bible say? What is my church teaching? And there's a lot more critical thinking. And I feel like have an opportunity to make real disciples who can make a difference in the communities and the churches that they're in. So I see a lot of hope in this brokenness, even in the pandemic. Like I see in this past year, wonderful things that have come out of this horrible tragedy. And God has done that throughout time, right? When things are really, really horrible, he has renewed things and brought things afresh. So I'm really encouraged and hopeful about what God is doing. It just looks messy.
I also get hopeful when I have long conversations with thoughtful Christian African-American brothers and sisters, because they have a different perspective, different energy, certainly are not carrying the cultural baggage that so many of us grew up with, and it's just like, sitting down with Jamar Tisby and Lecrae and some of these guys. It's like, well, this is fun. Can we just, Lecrae, what do we do to turn you loose? Because the more the voices of historically marginalized Christians shape the church in America, I think the more the church in America looks like Jesus. because I'm closer to Pharaoh than I am to Moses. That's my location. That's my social location. So it's exciting, and I'm not mad about that. I'm not depressed about that. It's just reality. So it is exciting to see. Like, okay, let's give you a voice. Let's give, like, if you like Hamilton, let's give that guy a mic, give that guy a platform.
Yeah.
Because we need, and that's why it's so fun to have the podcast, because we can find someone, regardless of where they're from socially in America. We can find someone and say, okay, that voice needs to be heard. And then
Yeah.
we actually have the ability to just, boost them. So, and I'm talking with Karen Swallow Pryor, and we talk about Frankenstein, and I follow up with her a week later, and she said, I legitimately saw a bump in the sales of Frankenstein the day after the podcast came out. I'm like, that is so cool, because we just helped you do something that you think is good for Christians, which is read some classics. So we helped you do that. And that gives me hope.
Speaking of that, Andrew says, was it Andrew? No, it was Charlene. Charlene says, has Phil started reading Frankenstein? She got her copy from the library today. Oh, you should have bought it. And she is ready for a book club.
Yeah, I jumped into it, and I'm almost done. So yeah, I've been reading it fairly quickly. It's not long. It's not, because I also, Karen Swallow Pryor sent me her Frankenstein, and by her version of Frankenstein, for no other reason than it is a gorgeous book. I mean, the graphic design and just the construction of these books is fantastic. So you'll read it, and then you'll want to give it, like the whole series, there are 4 of them now, a prime slot on your bookcase, because it just looks so good. It's gorgeous. Anyway, so I'm 3/4 of the way through it, and it's fascinating. So I guess we need to have some sort of a book club. Something.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually. A book club would be a fun idea.
Like Oprah's book club.
Speaking of which, when do you read, Phil? When do you do your reading?
Tends to be before bed.
At night.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I need to, like, make sure I head for bed early enough, or I mess up my sleep schedule, because I can't do it during the day. I do devotions in the morning, and then I exercise, and then I try to get stuff done. And then I need to relax a little bit in the evening with my wife and watch something on Netflix. And then I can't let that go too late, or I have no reading time.
All right. What about you, Sky? When do you do just reading?
I definitely read before bed. I always keep at least 2 books by my bedside table. But so much of what I do during the day, as I'm writing and studying, is reading. So yeah, periodically through the day, I have a stack of books. I mean, I'm surrounded by them, but I have a stack of books that I have to get through. Some of them are for upcoming interviews with podcast guests, which some I will carefully read, others I will skim and kind of get the gist of, if I'm being honest.
Have you ever tried to put together an interview outline just from the table of contents, because you don't have time to actually read the book? Because
I plead the fifth on that. Then there are books that I'm reading that are more theological or biblical, often related to what I want to write about in the devotional in the coming weeks or months. Actually, today I spent time outlining what I think we're going to do in the devotional through October.
Ooh, you want to give us a sneak peek?
Wow.
Well, this is I think what we're going to do, we're going to finish up the farewell discourse here in the spring. In the summer, I think I'm going to update and revise the series I did on justice a couple of years ago. So that'll give me a little bit of space in the summer, because I'm not starting from scratch. And then in the fall, not positive yet, but I think we're going to do 1 month about what the Bible has to say about immigration. And just so we don't get too serious, I want to do a month on circumcision. So 4 weeks on foreskins. That's how I'm going to bill it.
That's awesome. I love it.
I can't wait to see the doodles.
Uh-huh.
All right. So
we're definitely going to do a month on circumcision, because
I love it.
It's a topic that we just blow past it in the New Testament.
And it's so much referenced, because then it's circumcision of our hearts versus our penises. And so,
Can't
power.
say that on the
I know. But anyway, okay, we're going to change the subject. Armando wants to know how 321 Penguins came to be. And by the way, I want you to know I auditioned for the grandmother and was not selected. And I
That
don't
wasn't
hold
me.
it against you.
I wasn't the director.
Okay, and he says, Armando says,
Hey, I auditioned for Fidgel and I was not selected. So you and me both were rejected from 321 Penguins.
yes, I was not ready for prime time then. But anyway, so Armando says he's been a podcast listener since it began in 2012 when he was 14 in high school. And now he is in graduate school for film and animation at UMass. Now, if that doesn't make you feel old, I mean,
Wow.
holy cow. I can't believe we've been doing this almost 10 years. Anyway, how did 321 Penguins come to be?
I'll try to do a short version because it's actually fairly long and it's an interesting story. We were looking to expand. VeggieTales was going gangbusters, and I was expanding the company. And some of the executives that were just coming in were saying things like, now we need to show people that we're not a one-trick pony. Are we a one-trick pony? And then you think, oh, no, we can't be a one-trick pony. We need another pony. And so we were working with another Christian creative who had a show, a radio show that we liked. And we were talking to them about turning their radio show into an animated series. And they signed a deal to say, okay, you have the rights to the radio show to turn it into an animated series. And then several months went by and they got frustrated because it wasn't going fast enough. And they said, can I have my rights back? And we said, well, wait, we're not even there yet. We're just like trying to get going. And he finally said, I don't want you to do that show. I want that show back. What if I gave you an idea for a different show instead? And then we could swap it. And so we said, well, what would that show be? And so he came in with 321 Penguins. That wasn't the name, but it was penguins that go into space. And they were all identical. It was the names were accurate, Zigil, Fidgel, and Midgel, and two little kids. But the penguins were all interchangeable and identical. And they go into space and have adventures. And we kind of thought, well, it's okay. It's not developed along all that far. But if you really don't want to work with us on your other show, we're not going to make you work with us on your other show. So, okay, you can have your show back and we'll take the penguin idea. And then we developed it in-house. And it was Mike Naraki and me and Ron Smith, who became kind of the creative lead on the show, was one of our first animators, a hilarious guy. And that's when it turned into, unique personalities for the penguins, and they go to a planet that that exemplifies some flaw or vice that they have to save. And then it just kept developing. It was probably a 9-month to a year development process. We were hoping we could make the shows for about half of what a VeggieTales show cost, because VeggieTales had gotten really expensive. And we missed that, and it ended up being about 3/4 what a VeggieTales show cost, which unfortunately was more than we could reliably expect to sell. So we did 3, and then we realized we were losing money on them, and we actually at that point were rolling the animation studio into Jonah, the first movie. The Penguins team was a whole separate team, but since Penguins wasn't making money, we realized it would be great if we could turn out some VeggieTales videos in the year and a half when we're animating Jonah. So the Penguins team became a second VeggieTales team instead, and they made The Star of Christmas and An Easter Carol. It was done by the Penguins team, not the VeggieTales team. And then by the time those were done and released, Jonah had come out, and we were in a lawsuit, and it didn't make enough money, and we lost the lawsuit. And then there was no more question. Should we make more penguins? It was like, no, we're all dead. That's it. That's the end. Goodbye, everyone. A bunch of the Penguins team then went to Blue Sky as they were starting at Blue Sky Studios and worked on the first Ice Age movie. So there's a lot of names I recognize on Ice Age movies, and which they just shut down Ice Age, or just shut down Blue Sky.
Did they really? I didn't know that.
Because Disney ended up owning it because Fox bought it, and then Disney bought Fox. So then Disney had Disney Animation and Pixar and Blue Sky. It's like, why do we want Blue Sky? So they just announced they're shutting it down.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
Well, that started off like such a fun story, and it just ended so depressing. Phil.
That is that's read my book.
All right, we're going to go back to the theology questions, or sort of. When you hear conspiracy theories from the people around you, and you know that the theories aren't true, when do you know it's appropriate to say something?
Depends on your relationship with that person and your
Yeah.
ability to predict whether the conversation will be productive or not. I don't try if I know it's a relationship that will be damaged and it won't help. I don't try.
Okay. What about you, Sky? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is most people don't hold their beliefs or views because of facts. And this, we've talked about this on the show before. Jonathan Haidt talks about the rider and the elephant. The rider represents the rational part of us, and the elephant the emotional part. And as he puts it, the six-ton elephant is really the one who's in control. The rider thinks he's in control, but it's just an illusion. So when you're just peppering people with facts about why their conspiracy theory is wrong, you're targeting the rider. But the reason someone actually holds to a conspiracy theory has to do with the elephant. It has to do with their emotional connection to that conspiracy theory. And very often that's an issue of identity and community. It's the people they know all believe in this. It conforms to some sense of belonging or tribalism. And until you tackle that issue, the facts are just going to bounce off the person like rubber bullets. It's just not going to make any difference. That's actually, to be transparent, that's part of the unspoken mission of the Holy Post podcast. It's what we're trying to do is give people a sense that there is a community of Christians out there who are completely committed to Christ and yet don't believe that fear or anger is a legitimate way to engage the world around us. And as more and more people engage with the Holy Post and see that there's a community like them, it gives them that sense of belonging and identity and plausibility that you can actually be a Christian this way in the world. But if you're just tackling people with facts or why they're wrong, it's not going to work. So if you have an ability to show that person that you love or care about, not just that they're wrong, but that there are other people they love and care about who think differently, that's going to be more effective than just arguing.
Yeah.
And it was David French who was writing about the vaccine issues, and one of his points was just we all trust somebody. We've all decided who we trust. So rather than saying, your facts are stupid, the real issue is, okay, who is it that you listen to? Who is it that you feel that you can trust? And tell me why. Tell me why. I found this guy on YouTube and I think he's telling it straight. And I don't think that Dr. Fauci is telling it straight. And even though his boss, Francis Collins, is an evangelical Christian and, loves Jesus and has been awarded every medal in science that there ever was, I don't trust him. Okay. Why? So I think there are some conversations we get into about trust.
Right.
Who do we trust and why, without saying, well, your facts are wrong.
Michael Newton started an interesting conversation on the thread. I've been sort of scrolling through because, he's in a church. Basically, he said one of the things that caught my eye, he shared something in his church Bible study about the Bible Project, something he had learned from the Bible Project, and he basically got shut down. And it's like he's been trying, he has been listening to different voices, like you were saying from the beginning, whether it's the Holy Post or, the Bible Project. And, he may not agree with everything 100%, but there are things in there that have legitimate, value in there. But when he tries to bring those up and talk about those in his church, it's like you have to be there and you can't separate the Bible from Republican politics. And if you do, you really need to rethink, or you just sit there and be quiet and suck it up. And I think a lot of people struggle in that environment.
Yeah. I've found like sometimes people just have a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I heard the Bible Project was liberal, or, oh, I heard this source was fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm more and more saying, can you give me a specific example of that? Can you give me actually it was Eric Metaxas who said to me, Christianity Today has gone liberal. That magazine's gone totally liberal. And I just said, can you give me a specific example of that? and then the line went dead, because quite often it's talking points, and we haven't even looked at, I kind of have this thought when people say, when I'll have Jamar Tisby, or we'll have, a thoughtful African-American voice on, and then someone says, well, now you need to have, you need to read all of Thomas Sowell's writing so you can see how wrong Jamar Tisby is. And I'll say, well, give me one of the specific arguments Thomas Sowell makes that you think proves that what you heard on our podcast was wrong, because I will happily consider that argument and respond to it. Quite often, they don't have any arguments. They have this sense of, if you read this guy, then you would realize you're wrong and you would change your ways. Like, okay, let's just be specific. Let me respond to something that's specific. And that, that kind of helps with whether it's vaccines or masks or whatever. It's like, what have you heard specifically?
That's a good question.
Pushing you in that direction.
Yeah. And I like always asking questions and ask people to be more specific. And that tends to produce a better conversation than just fighting about the talking points. So this is a good question. Gage wants to know, he's heard you and Lisa, or he's heard you talk about the Enneagram before, and he knows that Lisa is working on that. And he wants to know, how have you been able to redeem the Enneagram with what seems to be the history of its origin?
It doesn't need redeeming. That assumes it's been lost or broken. The origins are really mysterious and kind of weird. And the question is there something specific about what you've learned from, I don't know, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, Strengths Finders, whatever tools you're using to get to know yourself better? Is there something specific you've learned from that system, that tool, that you find concerningly unbiblical? And for some of those tools, in a tool like the Enneagram, the unbiblical part is, I think some of the guys that are supposed to have done some of the early work were mystics and not in a Christian tradition. Like, well, okay, maybe, what do you see showing up in what you're reading now that you find concerning? And then, okay, if set that aside. It's kind of the same thing as the CRT conversation, that quite often it's guilt by association, or it's, the fallacy of origins, to say, well, I don't like the guy that it came from. Marx had something to do with CRT, so I'm just going to reject it outright. And some, mystic guy that said he did auto writing, which is when supposedly you're writing under the control of the spirit world, was one of the guys, who formed the Enneagram. So if there was that, then I have to throw everything out. Well, no, you don't have to throw. Wait, let's just actually see what it says. And if it's useful and if it's productive, whether it's critical race theory or the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or whatever, there's a new documentary on Netflix, I think, about the Myers-Briggs and the people who made it, and that they were kind of racist or something, and that maybe we shouldn't use the Myers-Briggs. So there's that in everything. Like in everything, there's like, well, I don't know about this part of it. It's like, swallow the meat, spit out the bones, figure out what helps you and what lines up with biblical faith. And I don't think the Enneagram needs to be redeemed.
The fallacy of origins thing drives me up the wall, because people who want to dismiss anything that has any kind of non-Christian origin, you'd have to actually get rid of most of the Bible, because an awful lot of the literary forms in the Bible are not original to Jewish or Israelite culture. They're from pagan cultures. The temple in Jerusalem was actually a pagan design temple, and they actually brought in Phoenician pagans to help build it, because they just adapted what pagans did in their temples and repurposed it for the worship of Yahweh in the Old Testament. Christmas, pagan holiday, does not have a biblical origin. The Puritans who first settled in America refused to celebrate Christmas because they saw it as a pagan holiday masquerading as a Christian one. Christmas trees, all these different. So we have throughout history borrowed and taken from pagan philosophies, literature, temples, symbols, and repurpose them for Christian use. And that is, I think, similar to what's going on with any of these tools you just mentioned, Phil, including the Enneagram. Whatever its origin might be, if you can use it for a Christian purpose, great. It's fine.
Right.
But
There are a lot of these tools, and it's true of modern psychology, where quite often the complaint is, you're replacing God with, Jung, with some, philosophy of the brain. You're replacing God with Zoloft. You're replacing God. All you need is the Bible, and if you pray, God will heal your brain. It's like, well, if you pray, God will heal your marriage. If you read the Bible, you won't have any relational issues. No, we had huge relational issues. And actually, the Enneagram was one of the things that helped, because I figured out why I like to be by myself and read books, and why my wife seemed to become different people in different settings, depending on what she thought that setting needed her to be perceived as successful in that setting, which is textbook Enneagram 3. It's like, yes, that is it exactly. It's not because you're sinful. It's because it's part of your worst fear kind of wiring. So it's been so helpful to us, and with our parenting, my wife is doing seminars for our denomination, for whole groups of denominational leaders, which they're finding remarkably beneficial. So when the fruit is good, it's okay if there's some weirdness way back in the, family tree somewhere. You can just throw out the weirdness if you bump into it and follow the fruit.
Good word. Okay, there's a couple of things going on here. There's a lot of me too. I think it's a great idea about the list idea. So I just want to say, if there is anybody listening in these 89 people that are watching now, if you would like to take all of our 10 years of episodes and make a list, we would love it. We will find somewhere on our website to put it. That would be amazing.
A book list, you mean?
Yes, a book list. And then somebody asked Sky if you could begin to post in advance the interviews that you have coming up, so maybe people could read the books. No? Okay.
No.
And
we don't know what order we're going to put them out in, or even if we're...
Yeah. Okay. So Noah is asking a question that I think is interesting. If we believe in salvation as a right solely to those in the church, and Noah, I don't know where you got that, then what right do we have to fight for anything other than saving souls?
There's a lot that needs to be unpacked there. Like, what does he mean by salvation? I honestly, I wrote a whole book about this. This is what Futureville is about. It's about the narrow. We've lost the theology of vocation, and by vocation I mean calling. And when you take that theology out of the church, then we try to come up with a universal vocation that applies to everybody. And so it becomes, well, we need to be about saving souls, or we need to be about, planting churches, whatever it might be. But Scripture is clear that the Holy Spirit calls people to different specific works. And the reason we obey those specific callings isn't because one work is more important than another, but because of the one who calls us to it, who's God himself. So if the Lord of the universe tells you that you are supposed to be a painter, then be a painter, because the Lord of the universe is telling you to do that. It has nothing to do with painting being more or less valuable than being an evangelist. It's about the one who calls you to it. But since that whole theology has just been erased from a lot of American Protestantism over the last 100 years, we've been left with this fighting about what works are most important. And so that, I think, it's not that salvation doesn't matter or saving people doesn't matter. You've got to see it in the context of vocations and callings. And if you don't have that as part of your theological vision, then you're left just arguing about what work is most important. And that's really not helpful.
So Mariana wants to know the funniest thing that happened to us last week. I'm going to give you a second to think about that. Because I will tell you that Bob Taylor is wondering if you hired your business manager yet. And if not, should it be him?
Probably. Just from his name, I think he's probably the guy for the job.
I think he would make a great business manager. And if he doesn't do it for the Holy Post, Lord knows I need one for the Girl Who Wore Freedom. So you can write me at Christian@Normandy Stories if you're really interested.
We've had very good experience with people with the last name Taylor.
Yeah, you have actually.
And I have benefited a lot from people named Bob. who
Yes, you have.
were fictitious.
Good
So
combination. All right, so go back to the question about the funniest thing that happened to you.
mine was actually the thing that tickled me most in the last week happened yesterday.
Okay, what was it?
I tweeted about it, so you may have heard about it already. I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Wheaton in an old house, and there was just a staircase right behind me. And suddenly there was this really loud thump, 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 thump on the stairs, like a bowling ball was rolling down the staircase of this old wooden house. And there were three of us in this little room at the base of the stairs in the back of the house, and doing our work on our little laptops with our masks on. And we all turned and looked, and a frozen quiche came tumbling down the stairs and landed right in the middle of the floor, wrapped in plastic. And it was big, like the size of like a small pizza sized frozen rock solid, like a bowling ball. Boom, quiche. And we all just stared at it. Like, what happens after a quiche rolls down the stairs? What's the next thing that happens? And it was like 30, 45 seconds later, we're just staring at the quiche.
Good thing there wasn't a tiny toddler at the bottom that it fell on their head.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was a heavy quiche.
I'm also glad the quiche wasn't ticking.
Yeah.
A woman comes down the stairs and she's holding a big basket with about 10 frozen quiches in it. She picks up the quiche. So apparently the quiche on top made a break for it at the top of the stairs. I think she might have been so embarrassed that then she didn't want to come down right away. So she just stayed up there for a while. And we all just stared at the quiche, trying to figure out what was happening in the universe. That was probably the highlight of my last week.
That's awesome. Sky, what about you?
I don't have anything that beats the frozen quiche falling down the stairs.
It's because he's a good storyteller. It wouldn't have sounded good if I told that story.
What was the funniest thing that you found after the giant snow mountain melted away?
Oh, it was just filthy nastiness. This isn't funny. It's kind of gross, but so our puppy, our 6-month-old puppy, sleeps in a crate kind of on my side of the bedroom. And he's a great sleeper, usually no problem. But last week, middle of the night, he starts whining and yapping, and it's just very unlike him. And so I kept telling him to shut up and go to sleep and leave me alone. And he just kept whining. And then like an hour or two later, I smelled something. And it wasn't good. And so I was at like 4 a.m. dealing with a dog with diarrhea in my bedroom.
That's horrible.
Yeah, it was great, but
I tried to warn you.
Steve
tried to warn us. Yeah, Steve was. So that was loads of fun, but
Sky,
not funny.
Sky, I'm having an issue. Sky, I'm having an issue. Sky. I can't hear you, Steve.
It'll be funny in a couple months when I'm really past it and learn my lesson.
Well, the funniest thing that happened to me is every morning I get up somewhere between 5 and 6, and I have a recliner that usually is focused in my family room. But in the early mornings, I swivel it around so that I can look out onto my back deck. And out there, I have a, like a cushion box. But on top of the cushion box, I have a little peanut house that squirrels can lift up the door and go in and get the peanuts. And it's incredibly entertaining. Like, I've been doing this since COVID started, and we have like all sorts of animals. Like at night, it's like opossums and skunk and raccoon parties. And it's been hilariously entertaining. And so the other morning, I was in there and I saw the hood of the little peanut box going like this from the inside. And it was so strange. So I was like, what is that? And I get over there and this little squirrel head pops out at me, looking at me from the box. And another squirrel comes up and pushes down on the top of the box. And so then it became this jack-in-the-box squirrel thing. And I'm sitting there like, is this really happening? I think I videoed a little bit of it on my phone. I may have to put it up because it really made me giggle at like 6:30 in the morning. So that was the funniest thing that happened to me.
That sounds fantastic.
It was. And we are running out of time. It's 9:18. We've been going for about an hour and we still have a ton of questions.
We have to make up the time I spent with technical difficulties,
That's true.
which was about an hour. So we can go
People
another.
people are still trying to solve our list issue. Everybody's now like willing to help out. Boy, Barb would like an Ask NT Wright Anything podcast. That would be great. By the way, if you don't know,
Justin Brierley has one of those.
So, does he?
Yeah, you can look up Ask NT Wright and Justin Brierley, and you'll find one.
That's cool.
I was watching one earlier just before we came on the air.
So for those of you that don't know, like I've talked about the little YouVersion app before, occasionally, like every few weeks, NT Wright is on there from his study, and he is my favorite. And so he gives the 1.5, 2-minute little talk that day on a scripture verse. So check that out. Okay. Yeah. We just keep getting this yes to list. Okay. Thank you so much for introducing me to Preston Sprinkle, Megan says. She's listened to so many episodes of Theology in the Raw since then. And let's see. We should, Lauren says we should interview CJ Kortelbaum. Do you guys know who that is?
No.
I like his name, though.
So, Phil, Alyssa has been saying she's been thinking about you and your church this week because you said you're merged with an Asian church. How did your church? I think we talked about that on what we recorded yesterday.
We talked about it on the podcast that's coming out tomorrow.
Yes. So yeah, he'll fill you in on that tomorrow. Somebody, people were talking about on Twitter today, I'm sure you guys saw that, how they really would like more content. They'd like us to podcast every day. Can you fathom that?
A daily. Yeah, that would take some infrastructure.
It would take a lot. I just don't even think you could do that. You can't be on every day, Phil.
That would be tiring. We'd have to rotate other Phils in.
Yeah.
But we have talked about, is there a way to do another podcast that alternates with this one, so there's 2 a week. And, as we have more friends that we get to know that are like-minded and also doing podcasts, can we collaborate to, like the Dispatch and David French and his little troupe, they have 3 or 4 podcasts that they do, and they're all on one, and 2 of them are on another one, and one of them does his own over here. So I think there's a way to create more content where, you can kind of follow your favorite theme to that spin-off podcast. And there's something to be done there. We just have to figure out how to do it and how to pay for it.
Yeah. And you know what? Speaking of spinoff podcasts, there's one that I know about called the Documentary First Podcast. And it's now had its 2-year anniversary, and it focuses on filmmaking. And we have lots of interesting filmmakers coming on the show. And I share a lot personally. So you might like the Documentary First Podcast. It comes out every Wednesday, Thursday.
And the weird link between the Holy Post and the Documentary First Podcast isn't just Christian, but I also have another podcast with Josh Lindsay called The Movie Proposal, where we every 2 weeks roughly review a movie, and we do it through a matrimonial theme where we talk about something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. That something blue means something that blew our minds or that blew chunks. So
boys.
Jason Rugg's also on that. So if you guys want to just talk movies, and sometimes they have spiritual themes, but often they don't, go check out The Movie Proposal.
Yeah. And on my podcast is made up of Jason and Josh as well. So if you don't get enough of Jason and Josh, with The Movie Proposal or with Holy Post, you can come see them on my podcast. Jack Brown, who I did learn, his name is John, Phil, actually. He wants Holy Post themed shirts, News of the Butt, Taco the Bell, and Phil forgetting about the live stream. All right. Christopher has this to say: in studying Acts 6 with my sister, I found what I believe to be an example of CRT and the elevation of Greek men to address the neglect of the Greek-speaking widows who were marginalized. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I've heard that argument made that, some people come back when you talk about racial justice and trying to benefit the marginalized, we're not supposed to show partiality. We're never supposed to show partiality. God says show no partiality. So you're proposing that we show partiality to these marginalized people. And that's a really good example where, the Greek widows were not getting taken care of. And the thought was it's because there wasn't anyone from that culture that knew how to take care of them and would prioritize them. So they chose deacons, and the deacons, I believe, all have Greek names, which means they were, choosing people from that culture. And so these were the Jewish apostles choosing Greek deacons to make sure that the Greek widows were getting taken care of, which is, hey, guess what? That's partiality, because there was a need and it was restorative justice. So, yeah.
It's also important to point out that in the Old and New Testament, I'm thinking of like the book of James, the commands against partiality are, to my understanding, always directed at partiality towards those with power and wealth. That's what's forbidden. Whereas you see Jesus showing partiality, like in Acts 6, towards those who are marginalized, forgotten, overlooked. And so that's the idea. It isn't that you can't ever distinguish between anyone. It's you shouldn't give preferential treatment to those who you can benefit from, meaning the rich and the powerful. That's the danger.
Cool. All right.
Yep.
Noah has a good question. How do you think the cultural mandate in Genesis compares and contrasts with the 7 mountains mandate? Well, the 7 mountains mandate is just crazy. So, we can move on.
Well, no, but as we talked about, there is a grain of truth to the 7 mountains mandate.
I know,
It's
I'm
just
being facetious.
been perverted. The cultural mandate in Genesis 1, though, doesn't just apply to Christians. It applies to all human beings. That's the difference. God has created all of humanity to reign on the earth and to make something of the earth and to cultivate it in a way that reflects his glory and brings flourishing to all people. So it's a human vocation. It's not simply the church's vocation or a Christian vocation. And when you get into the 7 mountain thing, it specifically says Christians should be on top of these 7 elements of the culture in order to have power and dominion over everyone else. That's where you depart from Genesis 1.
Yeah, there is a very strong sense that Christians must displace others,
right,
in roles of power, which often turns into, by whatever means necessary, political shenanigans, whatever we have to do to get in power, because it's that important that we take over the culture. And yeah, that's hard to argue for biblically.
So again, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just like this was exactly what the Jews believed at the time of Jesus. They thought that when God's kingdom came, the Jewish nation was going to take over the earth, and they were going to displace the Romans. They were going to displace Caesar, and Jews were going to dominate the world because they were God's chosen people. And that's exactly came to dismantle. And he said, no, this is not how it's going to go. You're not going to have power over everyone else. In fact, it's the meek who will inherit the earth, meaning the humble. And he said, my kingdom's not of this world. We're not going to do it that way. So ironically, the 7 mountain mandate is a recapitulation of exactly what Jesus came not to do and to dismantle. It's why he was crucified, because the people were so angry at him for not giving them Jewish domination over the Romans that they threw him up on a cross. So in my mind, the 7 mountain dominionism stuff is a heresy. It is exactly why Jesus said to Peter, get behind me, Satan, because you are thinking the thoughts of man, not the things of God. So it is an antichrist in the church today, and it has to be called out as such.
So 10 of you have now volunteered to help put together the book list just on Patreon. So you guys are
awesome. Thank you so much. And hey, Jack loves the movie proposal, and he's going to subscribe to Documentary First. I'm so excited about that. Thank you. Tim says, to talk about Christian Nashvilleism, would you ever have someone on in the Christian music industry to talk about that? Maybe Steve Taylor?
I've had him on in the past. He was on in year 1 at one point. It might be interesting to have him on. John Thompson of True Tunes Music would be he's more of a thinker on Christian music, whereas Steve is a provocateur, but more of an artist. So
we had Michael Card on at one point too, but not to talk about the Christian.
Yeah,
music.
we had Michael Card on too, and we've had David Gunger was on in a past episode to talk about kind of why he doesn't make Christian music. He makes liturgical music in his view. So we've had some interesting conversations about music. It's not, neither Sky nor I are huge music guys. Sky listens to movie soundtracks all the time because you know, can then picture himself as Gandalf. And I, I do listen to a fair amount of Christian music, but I'm not I don't keep up on it enough. So yeah, someone like John Thompson just reached out to me to say he's launching a new podcast and was wondering if I could be on it. And because he's a huge Holy Post fan. So we could do something. We should do something.
Speaking of Christian music in the 80s, I had a guy on my podcast it's coming out tomorrow. His name is Chris White, and he is the director of Electric Jesus. And he is a Christian. He grew up in the Christian subculture, and he loved music, and he wrote this movie that I think is hilarious. It stars Kevin from The Office as well as Judd Nelson. And I think that you guys will love it and really relate to it. And he's, going to talk about it on our podcast, and it's going to be coming out soon. So you could watch that. I hope you'll have him on the movie proposal, Sky, if nothing else. Josh really liked him. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to watching that.
Yeah, it's really a great movie. Well, do you want to kind of sing? Well, before you sing us out, can I just give some exciting news about my film, as if I haven't talked about it enough, but I still have some other things to say?
Sure.
Great. Awesome.
What happened? Did you get an award today?
I got the award yesterday.
Okay.
Today we announced our distribution deal. And so we're posting that on social media tomorrow, I think. But this weekend, our film is free. So this is your weekend to watch it. It is free in French and in English all over the world. The World War II Foundation, you'll see them on Twitter and Facebook. They are showing our film through their festival for free over the weekend. Also from the Thin Line Doc Fest, that is also free for a week. So this is like the best time to see our film for free. And you can find that information on the World War II Foundation social media or on thegirlwhoworefreedom.com. So that's the exciting news for that. Jack Brown says, I know you guys hear this a lot, but thank you for keeping me sane this past year, especially. And these live streams are an amazing bonus and blessing. And I'm going to leave it with that. I just want to say that's the same for us. Wouldn't you say, guys, when people write you and encourage you and tell you how you've made a difference?
Oh, yeah, totally. Especially after 10 people just told you were a woke Marxist baby killer.
Yeah. So Chris B said, thanks for all you do. You guys have helped me through this year more than you ever know. That means a ton to us. And for those of you that are not here live and you're just watching this on the rebound, try to join us next time. We really do love having you here and hearing from you. It's so great that you support us on Patreon. This would not be possible really without your support. So thank you tremendously. Phil, can you sing us out?
I totally can do that. And I'm sure it'll come out great because I'm really, really tired.
I love it when you do these.
I woke up at 3:45 this morning, and has been happening lately. Then my mind started thinking about a gazillion different things, the kids' projects I'm trying to get funded, and the cultural issues that we're trying to wrestle with, and interactions I've had with people who, think I'm out to lunch. And then it was 8:00 and I hadn't fallen back to sleep. So and then I slept a couple hours, and then I got up and tried to fumble my way through my day. So I'm a little off, and I can't stop thinking about that quiche.
Somebody said they were glad you told the story because they didn't realize it was frozen. I too didn't realize it was frozen.
It was frozen. It was like a bowling ball coming down the stairs, but it was a rock hard quiche. Mm-hmm. Hey, don't shout. Please don't scream. I'm glad you came to our live stream. We talked about stuff half the night about social location and NT rights. And now it's time to say goodnight. And everybody start compiling books for our new book list.
Nice job, Phil.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Now I'm gonna collapse.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you rallying and joining us. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you, Sky, for being thinky and for being just you.
And
And
thanks for moderating, Christian.
Yes,
You're
and for dressing in black in a dark room, so you just kind of look like a sky head floating. Ooh, thanks everybody for coming, and actually a bunch of people have signed up on Patreon in the last week. So wow, thanks guys.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's enabling us to have conversations about expanding, to have more impact and reach more people, and also bring in more voices to be able to platform more voices that are worth having a platform. So we really appreciate it. Thanks.
Stay tuned for more on that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, everybody. Good night, everybody.
You guys.
Good night. Good night. Goodbye.